benefit of agentic workflows is that it allows you to do many tasks effectively that just previously were not possible. But there are other benefits as well, including parallelism that lets you do certain things quite fast, as well as modularity that lets you combine the best of breed components from many different places to build an effective workflow. Let's take a look. My team collected some data on a coding benchmark that tests the ability of different LLMs to write code to carry out certain tasks. The benchmark used in this case is called Human Eval, and it turns out that GPT 3.5, this is a model that the first publicly available version of ChatGPT was based on, if asked to write the code directly, to just type out the computer program, gets 48% right on this benchmark. This is a Parse-K metric. GPT-4 is a much better model. Its performance leaps to 67% with this also non-agentic workflow. But it turns out that as large as the improvement was from GPT 3.5 to GPT-4, that improvement is dwarfed by what you can achieve by wrapping GPT 3.5 within an agentic workflow. Using different agentic techniques, which you learn about later in this course, you can prompt GPT 3.5 to write code and then maybe reflect on the code and figure out if you can improve it. And using techniques like that, you can actually get GPT 3.5 to get much higher levels of performance. And similarly, GPT-4 used in the context of an agentic workflow also does much better. So even with today's best LLMs, an agentic workflow lets you get much better performance. And in fact, what we saw in this example was the improvement from one generation of model to another, which is huge, is still not as big a difference as implementing an agentic workflow on the previous generation of model. Another benefit of using agentic workflows is that they can parallelize some tasks and thus do certain things much faster than a human. For example, if you ask an agentic workflow to write an essay about black holes, you might be able to have 3 LMs run in parallel to generate ideas for web search terms to type into search engine. Based on the first web search, it may identify, say, 3 top results to fetch. And based on the second web search, it may identify a second set of web pages to fetch, and so on. And it turns out that whereas a human doing this research would have to read these 9 web pages sequentially or one at a time, when you're using an agentic workflow, you can actually parallelize all 9 web page downloads, and then finally feed all these things into an LM to write an essay. So even though agentic workflows do take longer than purely non-agentic workflows or by direct generation by just prompting a single time, if you were to compare this type of agentic workflow to how a human would have to go about the task, the ability to parallelize downloading lots of web pages can actually let it do certain tasks much faster than the non-parallel sequential way that a single human might process this data. To build on this example, it turns out one of the things I often do when building agentic workflows is look at the individual components like the LM and add or swap out components. So for example, maybe I look at the web search engine I use up here and I might decide that I want to swap in a new web search engine. When building agentic workflows, there are actually multiple web search engines, including Google, which you can access via Serper, as well as others like Bing, DuckDuckGo, Tvili, U.com. There are actually quite a lot of options for web search engines designed for LLMs to use. Or maybe instead of just doing 3 web searches, maybe on this step, you can swap in a new news search engine so they can find out what's the latest news on recent breakthroughs on black hole science. And lastly, instead of using the same LM for all of the different steps, I will often try out different large language models and maybe try out different LM providers to see which one gives the best result for different steps of this system. So to summarize, the main reason I use agentic workflows is to just give much better performance on many different applications. But in addition, it can also parallelize some tasks that humans will otherwise have to do sequentially. And the modular design of many agentic workflows also lets us add or update tools and sometimes swap out models. We've talked a lot about the key components of building agentic workflows. Let's now take a look at a range of agentic AI applications to give you a sense of the sorts of things people are already building and the sorts of things you will build yourself. Let's go on to the next.